All right, today we're diving into a really wild and honestly pretty radical idea for one of New York City's biggest financial assets. It's a plan that asks a very simple question about $250 billion. So, what is this fiscal elephant in the room? You know, when city leaders talk about budgets and deficits, our source material says there's this one asset that's just so massive, it kind of gets overlooked, but its impact, it's everywhere. And the scale is just, wow. We are talking about $250 billion, $250 billion. Just let that number sit there for a second. So what on earth is this pile of cash?
Well, here it is. This massive number is the combined value of New York City's 5 employee pension funds. This is the retirement money for teachers, police officers, firefighters, you name it, all the city's public servants. And it's all managed in these huge investment portfolios.
Now, $250 billion asset sounds pretty great, right? But the source material we're looking at today argues that this fund actually comes with some huge problems. And it starts with 2 big ones: high costs and really low returns.
So let's look at who's actually paying into this system. As you can see here, in 2022 alone, New York City taxpayers had to chip in almost $10 billion. Meanwhile, city employees contributed about $2.5 billion. That is a huge slice of the city's budget right there.
And it's not just the contributions. On top of that, there's another huge problem: the insane cost of just managing all this money. We're talking about all the fees and overhead it takes to run 5 separate, really complex funds.
And this really gets to the core of the problem. Get this, spending for just one of the funds shot up 170% in only 5 years. And about a decade ago, there was a proposal to combine the funds, which would have saved $1 billion a year, but it got shut down. Why? Well, partly because the unions wanted to keep control over their own individual funds.
Okay, so the costs are high and the whole structure is a bit of a mess. But hey, the investments must be making it all worth it, right? I mean, the entire point of a pre-funded pension system is to generate great returns.
Well, not exactly. According to a report from a former NYC comptroller, the performance has been, let's just say, underwhelming. It found that over a 10-year stretch, once you factor in the $2.5 billion paid in management fees, the actual return on investment was zero. Nothing. The system wasn't just expensive, it was basically failing at its one job.
So, if you have a system that's got sky-high costs, it's inefficient, and it's not even delivering returns, it leads the author of our source material to ask a very, very direct question. And there it is. Why go through all the trouble, all the expense, all the market risk of investing $250 billion if at the end of the day, after you pay all the fees, you're not even making any money? This single question is the foundation for this entire alternative idea.
Asking that question suddenly opens the door to a completely different way of doing things. So let's check out the proposed new model, one that gets rid of that complicated, expensive investment layer altogether.
This really breaks it down. On the one hand, you have the current system, where you invest money and hope for good returns, but you're also dealing with market risk and those pricey managers. On the other hand, the proposal is what's called a pay-as-you-go system. The city would just pay pensioners directly from its regular revenues. That makes payouts a guaranteed expense, not something that depends on the whims of the stock market.
Now, I know what you're thinking. What about the retirees? And that's the most important part. This idea is not about taking anything away from them. The proposal argues that pensioners would get the exact same guaranteed payment they get today, including their cost of living adjustments. You could even write these protections right into the city charter to make them ironclad.
So how would you even make this happen? Well, the source lays out a pretty clear 5-year plan. First, you legally lock in the payouts to pensioners. Step 2, you get rid of that whole expensive investment management layer. And finally, you slowly and carefully sell off that $250 billion in assets so you don't crash the market.
Okay, and this is where the idea gets really mind-blowing. Because after you've sold those assets, you're suddenly sitting on $250 billion in cash. So what do you do with that kind of windfall?
The proposal is to reinvest that money directly back into the city. A big chunk would be used for paying down debt and just creating long-term stability. Then a cool $50 billion would go to starting a new public bank, and another $30 billion would be set aside for critical repairs to public housing.
Let's start with that first piece. If you pay down a bunch of city debt, New York's credit rating immediately gets better. And a better credit rating means it's cheaper for the city to borrow money for every single future project, which could save billions for decades to come.
Next up is this idea of a $50 billion public bank. This would be a bank owned by the city itself, and its main goal would be to give loans to local small businesses and people who might not get them from the big commercial banks. The idea is to directly create jobs and grow the city's economy from the ground up.
And then we have this number, $30 billion, aimed squarely at another massive city problem.
That $30 billion would go straight to the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA. Anyone who lives in New York knows how badly this is needed. It would make a huge dent in the funding gap for critical repairs and maintenance in the city's public housing.
So, when you put all of these pieces together, paying pensioners directly, getting rid of management fees, and reinvesting all those assets, what's the ultimate goal? The author argues it could literally change the city's financial future.
I mean, the claim here is absolutely huge. The argument is that with the remaining $170 billion or more managed properly, the city could create such a stable foundation that it might actually end the constant cycle of budget crises, deficits, and painful service cuts for good.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. This whole plan is for New York City, sure, but it raises a much bigger point. Could the key to financial health for cities everywhere be not just cutting services, but totally reimagining how we use these massive public assets? It's a pretty powerful idea to end on.